Louise Palmer-Masterton, thank you so much for joining us on the Plant Trainers podcast today.
Thanks very much for inviting me.
We are excited to talk about all things restaurants and menus, but before we do, we want to know if you have a moment of gratitude to share with us.
Yeah, well, I've many moments of gratitude, I suppose, throughout my entire life. But my family, my husband's family, are my greatest supporters in every single possible way, really. And our extended families, we're very blessed with having close families on both sides. My husband and I have 2 children, and we just simply wouldn't be here where we are without the support and love of our respective families. So yeah, massive gratitude to all of them.
It's wonderful. They do say it takes a village.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, you hear all sorts of things about, particularly in a marriage and in-laws and all of that stuff, but that's just complete opposite in our family. We're extremely close and supportive of each other.
That's wonderful. And I hope that flows over to your children and who they choose as partners and all of that. Beautiful. Thank you for that moment of gratitude. And I'm sure that you're grateful that you found a plant-based vegan lifestyle. Tell us a little bit about how you found that and what changed for you.
Well, crikey, I mean, that's a long time ago now. I mean, it was for me, I mean, I do believe that everybody's on the spectrum with this. For some people it happens in an instant, and for other people it's a much slower and more gradual process. But for me, it was one of those instantaneous aha moments. And it was when I was in my late teens, and I had a friend who introduced me to the idea of compassionate eating for the first time, and I just never thought about it before. And like the minute I thought about it, it was instant, hit me like a ton of bricks. And it was a moment that I changed my life forever. I stopped eating meat on the spot, and I've literally never turned back from that moment.
So you were quite young. Did anything change for you physically or psychologically or socially? What changed in your life at that point?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think a lot of things changed as a result of that realization, really. And I mean, I earlier than that, which preceded this, I suppose, I randomly got taught yoga by one of my PE teachers at school. It wasn't part of the curriculum. It wasn't planned. It was a completely happy accident as well. And I guess that was sort of another aha moment for me. And so I became interested in practices of yoga and meditation. And within that, the kind of idea of compassion and non-harming is very much a part of that as well. So I think there was a kind of massive evolution in that moment in terms of compassionate eating, non-harming, kind of treading lightly on the earth. It was all of those things all at once. And in your late teens and early 20s, you're on a voyage of discovery anyway, aren't you? It's, the world is, a wonderful place, and you're very much in harmony with nature as well. So there's a kind of a lot of things happening for me at that time, all of which stayed with me actually and kind of evolved through the rest of my life.
I love the term compassionate eating, and it gives people the opportunity to really reflect on what that means and what they're putting into their mouth and consuming, because a lot of people don't take the time to really think about it. So it's a great term that people need to process a little bit.
I think that this is I'm constantly surprised that people still eat animals. I mean, literally, I don't really understand how they're not having that conversation in their own minds. But I think, like you just said, it literally is that they're just not thinking about it. And I think when you do start to think about it, and you definitely see that in children, my own children have been raised vegetarian, but the idea for them of eating animals, and they speak about their friends too, that they've got this real disconnect of animals, they eat animals, and try and have that conversation is kind of difficult.
Yeah, and as Adam multitasks and he's talking on the podcast and wrestling with the dog at the same time. The puppy, we've only had her about 7 weeks at this point, and my kids look at her and like they've mentioned to me, there's no difference between her and the animals on the farm that we take care of, and how can people eat animals if they can have a pet in their house? How do they not make that connection? So, but I do really believe that more and more people are making that connection. There she is, are making that connection. If anybody hasn't checked us out on YouTube, you can see Callie's Plant Trainers podcast premiere. So how did you then get into the restaurant business? Where does food really begin to play a part in your life?
I think it was a kind of gradual evolution since the time when I became initially vegetarian and vegan. I mean, this was 35 years ago, and at that time, I mean, there were certainly no vegan restaurants. There weren't really even any vegetarian restaurants, although there was a fledgling vegetarian movement, which was very much tied around the hippie movement, certainly in the UK at that time. The plant-based thing had started to become a thing in the US, for example. So it was all kind of starting to happen, but it was very, very fringe back then. So basically, I started to cook, and I continued to cook. I also was fortunate enough to travel a lot. I traveled a bit in Asia. I spent quite a good deal of time in Thailand. Absolutely fell in love with the cuisine there. So the whole kind of process really evolved through a love of cooking. And I guess I kind of joke a little bit about that. I spent 35 years trying to find a decent vegan restaurant meal, and didn't find one. So hey presto, I, in the end, created my own, the restaurant that I always wanted to eat in, but never found. So it was a very long and gradual evolution. And I had another business, which was a multi-site business, which I started in 2010. And we were always trying to make a vegan cafe work within that environment. And eventually it evolved into a full-blown restaurant, which was at the end of 2016, which is when Stem and Glory opened its doors for the first time.
So tell us a little bit about that. If anybody is in the UK area, the London area, or going to be traveling possibly this summer, tell us where we could find your restaurants and what we would find there, because I'm hungry and I want to hear.
And you want to go to the UK.
Well, it's so funny, because the first thing you ever do when you travel as a vegan is you get on the Google, don't you, and you search out the vegan restaurants. I mean, exactly that. I mean, and honestly, I mean, London's got loads of places, but compared to just normal restaurants, it's massively underserved still, in my view, because I can still hardly ever find the food that I'm looking for. But anyway, we're based in Cambridge, which is where I'm originally from. We're actually slap bang right Cambridge railway station, so we've got a super lovely spot there, got a big outside terrace. And then in London, our original restaurant is at a place called Bart Square. So it's between Farringdon and Barbican. It's in the city. It's the old part of the city. It's a super lovely part of the city. And if you're into tourist stuff, we're right next to St. Paul's as well. It's a very nice area to visit. And then our new site is at 100 Liverpool Street, which overlooks Broadgate Circle, which is actually in the city as well, but it's a kind of whole different part of the city. Very, very busy part of the city as well. And then we have plans to expand beyond that without giving too much away. We've got a list of kind of prominent cities we'd like to cover in the UK, but we're also starting to look outside of the UK as well already. So we very much see Stem and Glory as a global brand.
Beautiful. And so how important is the need for purely vegan or plant-based restaurants as opposed to restaurants that can cater to vegans and plant-based people?
Yeah, this is the $6 million question. I mean, because we get asked this a lot, really, because I mean, yeah, I mean, if you're vegan, you very much appreciate vegan restaurants. If you're a vegan, you appreciate non-vegan restaurants putting on more vegan options. But I just think you're going to find better food in vegan restaurants because you've got chefs who are working with this food all of the time. Chefs are very, very creative people. So if you've got chefs in a non-vegan restaurant, their creativity is going into creating foods with animal products as their kind of primary product, whereas in a vegan restaurant, people are working with vegetables. So the evolution is like massively advanced in terms of vegan chefs cooking in vegan restaurants. So I do believe you're going to experience far, far better quality vegan food, but also, much edgier, kind of more unusual, progressive sort of flavors and techniques and all of that as well. There are a few quite notable chefs in the UK now. I don't know if it's the same where you are, but they are former non-vegan chefs now turned plant-based, and I think it's quite an interesting space to watch. But I still think this might be a little bit controversial. I still think they're a little bit behind people who've been working with plant-based foods for 10, 15, 20 years. I think you need to spend time to make that up,
Yeah, there's kind of a progression, right? Like you can go to an Omni restaurant and you'll find your Beyond Burger or Impossible Burger or something there. So they kind of just, they put something on the menu to make you be able to eat there so that you could be out with your Omni friends. And, they do good salads and burritos and things like that. But when you go into, a vegan restaurant or plant-based restaurant, then you'll have the ones that are you know, I could see that progression where those chefs might be creating things, and not that there's anything wrong with it, and it's great to have it, recreating what you used to eat before you were vegan in the vegan way. And then when we go to some of these other restaurants that are purely plant-based, and it's about creating something completely different and utilizing the
It's
plants.
much more artistic and creative,
Yeah.
and the flavors and the profiles of the flavor, it's much different and deeper, I think.
Yeah, and you can't classify it. You can't be like, oh, this is, you know, it's just different. It's different. What was that place that we went to where they brought out the
It's
each
just
course
a
at a time?
different experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And in answer to your question earlier, which I'm not sure I answered, so with the food that we offer at Stem and Glory is, it's kind of the food that, I mean, when I was a young vegan, you either had healthy food or you had delicious food. There was no such thing as healthy food that was also delicious. But so that's what we're trying to create as well, so that it's not like a punishment to go and eat vegan. I mean, I'm sure you've had many occasions where you've gone to a restaurant and the only thing you could order is salad, for example, which is, you know, it's a bit disappointing. Obviously, we all need to eat to live, and obviously I quite like salad, but you know, there are so many more interesting things that you can do. So creating food that's still healthy but is delicious with those different layers of umami flavors, doing interesting things with vegetables, obviously that's where we've positioned ourselves.
That sounds beautiful. So for somebody who's maybe friends with restaurateurs who are omnivore, or get to know the restaurants that they go to all the time, but they want them to start offering more vegan or plant-based options, how do you suggest they approach that conversation, and what do you suggest they put on their menus?
Yeah, I mean, this is becoming a topic for debate at the moment, especially here in the UK. I mean, it's sort of the elephant in the room, isn't it, a lot of the time? I mean, and I do get it. If you're a restaurant that's your primary offering is like steak, for example, you know, the thought of offering plant-based options must be utterly terrifying, you know, in terms of wondering what's going to happen. Will you lose your customers? You know, it's all of that stuff. We have this thing in the moment in the UK. Burger King have their prime location in Leicester Square in the centre of London. They've turned it vegan for a month, basically. And there's people posting on all the vegan forums about they're sat there at a table and watching people coming in and then walking out cursing because they couldn't have their animal burgers, you know, and just kind of the irony of that, you know. So I do understand how nerve-wracking it must be if you're a restaurateur and you kind of know you need to start moving in a more sustainable direction. Whatever you might think about the animals, the numbers, you know, in terms of meat and dairy, they just don't even compare to plant-based in terms of emissions and so on. But there is quite a lot of research which is coming out now about they think this sweet spot in terms of a menu, and this is a little bit future looking, I suppose. So if 75% of your menu is plant-based and 25% of your menu is not plant-based, that you're giving your diners sufficient nudges towards making plant-based options. Now, obviously your plant-based options need to be good, but you're still allowing the choice of meat and dairy should people want to opt in and choose them. So they're kind of suggesting that that's sort of the way to try and head in that direction, so that you're still providing for choice. But when you give people that choice and it's 75-25, you know, a very large amount of people are going to go towards the plant-based route. That's just human nature. So I think rather than kind of beating people up and trying to make them change their habits, it's about enticing and nudging them in the right direction by providing incentives, good food. But it's about menu positioning and prominence and things like your daily specials. Why not make them plant-based? You know, make them really exciting, give them prominence on the menus. So there's a kind of whole host of things that restaurateurs can be doing to sort of move themselves in the right direction, which are not sudden, they're not dramatic, they're not terrifying, they're not going to lose all their customers. But I do think that is the direction it's all heading in, certainly in the next few years anyway.
And what if somebody wants to help support a vegan or plant-based restaurant in their area and make sure that it stays in business, what would you want your customers to do, or what can we do to help support the restaurants in our area? Besides eat there.
Well, I mean, you know what? It's such a good question. And I mean, obviously, customers, of course, we all need customers. But, you know, I just, it makes me weep to see anybody leave a bad review of a vegan restaurant or even an independent restaurant, to be honest. People can be brutal. You know, I live in a small town, Cambridge. Now, we were the first vegan restaurant here. We now got 5 vegan restaurants and 1 vegetarian restaurant. And, you know, it would be great if they were all busy all of the time and all well supported. And I just think, that, you know, we talked about a disconnect between people's understanding of like pets being an animal and the animals that you eat. They're not connecting those two things together. I don't think people fully appreciate what it means to support an independent small restaurant. And I think if they thought about it, then everybody would support small independent restaurants, because people put their entire lifeblood into these spaces and they're usually doing it for love. They're not doing it for money. And I think if people really fully realize that, they wouldn't make complaints. They would perhaps offer constructive feedback. But yeah, I think appreciation of small businesses generally, I think, is a little bit lacking sometimes. And I think, you know, if you are a vegan, just don't ever leave a bad review for a vegan restaurant, please, because maybe you had a bad time. Maybe drop them an email, but don't put it out in public. I just think that's so damning. You know, I don't know anybody who runs a vegan restaurant who serves rubbish food or does it for bad reasons. It's just, you know, obviously in restaurants things can happen sometimes, and as a proprietor of a restaurant I would be really happy to have that feedback, but it's utterly soul destroying to, you know, to see these things and it does matter. And a lot of small independents don't have the firepower of bigger restaurants in terms of marketing budgets, marketing departments. And I think the prevalence of vegan restaurants, I think they're almost exclusively independent. So, I mean, it's interesting to see how it develops now. I mean, we've got a couple of sort of fledgling, potentially big chains in the UK, of which actually we're probably one of them. And it'll be interesting to see how it goes, because I think once vegan makes it into the mainstream, I think it'll do good for everybody as well, and all the small independents as well. But whilst it's still on the fringe and it's very independent, it's very dependent upon support of people, of all people, you know.
So I heard a rumor that Stem and Glory is a net zero carbon menu labeling restaurant. Can you maybe explain what that actually means? Because some people may not have, I don't even think I know what it really means.
Well, it's a very new science at the moment. So we are a net zero business now. We've spent the last 2 years really on this journey of basically a huge deep dive into our emissions across the entire business. So we are now fully offset, carbon neutral. We're actually heading for carbon negative. So we're aiming to offset more than we actually emit. So that's kind of where we would like to see the business into the future, so that if you come and dine in our restaurant, you are not creating carbon by doing so. And I think that is the way of the future as well. Now, in terms of carbon labeling, it's the same type of data collection, to be honest. So we analyze all of our dish creation, all of our menu ingredients and so on, cooking, where it comes from, all of that stuff is analyzed, and you end up with a number for the emissions for your meal, basically. So you normally have a scale which goes from very low to very high. So you've got very low, low, medium, high, very high. Very low is dark green, high is red. Now we only have very low and low on our menu, and that's probably going to be the case for any plant-based restaurant, to be honest. But nevertheless, it's incredibly educational to see it in black and white, you know, the actual emissions of your meal. And we've had a very good response from our customers about this. And I guess if it's not in Toronto already, it probably will be soon.
So that means that on your menu, it shows you that what level carbon emission your meal would be, so people could select their menu, their item based on the carbon emissions.
Exactly. It's an education piece, really. You have the carbon intensity of the dish per kilo. So carbon intensity is like, so some dishes are higher intensity because of the way they're created, but then in terms of the amount that you eat, it might be less in terms of the kilograms of CO2. So there's kind of two things going on there. I mean, in a vegan restaurant, like I say, it's either going to be low or very low, but it'd be very interesting when this comes out into the sort of wider marketplace, because then I think if you're a proprietor, what we spoke about earlier with the 75-25, there will be ways that you can make your high emissions meals lower emissions by substituting different ingredients. For example, we're even doing that in our level, even in the very low categories. But I think once people start to learn about this, I think you will start to see massive changes in the terms of the sort of ingredients people use.
And that's including like where the ingredients have come from and how they got shipped and delivered to you, or if you grew them out in the on the roof or in the backyard and things like that.
Is there someone that regulates that, or the restaurant just manages it on their own? Is there like an FDA kind of thing that oversees what you're putting on your menu?
Well, this is a very good question. I mean, this is the hot topic at the moment, really. So there are a number of players already. We use a company called Food Steps. Now, they're one of the original people. Now, there are various sort of standards. One's called the Cool Food Standard. And they do take into account everything from how something was grown, land use, how it's shipped and all of that stuff. But obviously, again, this is a very new science. We do expect it to become more regulated as it becomes more widespread, but already we know of another, like a competitor, although it seems a bit weird to describe it like that, to Food Steps. And already I'm looking at the emissions data they've got on another plant-based. I'm just thinking that just doesn't look right to me, because I've done the process myself. So again, unfortunately, it's a new thing and it's probably wide open for abuse as well. But I do think eventually it will kind of get there, but there's just be a few teething troubles, I guess, in the beginning.
I think just the awareness of it now from a consumer point of view and from a restaurateur point of view, and the small changes that might be made just from the awareness can have a really huge impact. And I guess, you go to McDonald's and you see this many calories for this meal. Now you have another, like this many, this much admissions for this meal, or you have your little gluten-free symbol and then you have your little low admission symbol. So that's kind of cool and really, really important to a lot of people these days too. What about like the plates and forks and napkins? Does that get incorporated into that, or is that something separate?
Well, that doesn't get incorporated into the meal, but that does get incorporated into our emissions as a business in terms of our offset. So yeah, everything is factored in. We do it also for the refurbishments of the restaurants. I mean, the whole thing, it just gets done across the board. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. What we actually want to end up is with offering our customers the opportunity to offset the emissions of their meal. It's an optional thing. And so we're already offsetting everything within our restaurant, but then the customer can opt to further offset. And then that kind of is pushing us in an even more kind of carbon negative direction.
Fascinating.
So if you're eating at a restaurant that doesn't have that, what can you do to try to eat as carbon low as possible?
Well, eat plant-based, because, even if you're eating plant-based junk food, it's low emissions compared to anything meat and dairy. I mean, it literally doesn't compare. You're talking up to 50 times the emissions as soon as you start putting that stuff in there. But I think it's really important to note that, and talk about teething troubles and all of that this stuff is kind of being consumer driven, and businesses will start to take notice when stuff is consumer driven. And they did some research a little while ago. 88% of consumers want brands to help them be more sustainable. It's not like a passing fad. So if you're sticking your neck out and you're giving your customers opportunities, you're showing them how to be more sustainable. They'll thank you for it, and that's certainly been our experience.
So what kind of food can we find at STEM and Glory? Is it like classic English food, like the fake fish and chips kind of thing, or is it a fancier kind of deal, or what do you got there?
It's definitely fancier. So I guess we have a couple of dishes which are a little bit more kind of comfort, I suppose, but with a STEM and Glory twist. So one of our best-selling classics is Swede gnocchi. And it has like a gorgonzola in inverted commas, obviously, because it's not got cheese in it. So it's got like a creamy sauce, and we hand make the Swede gnocchi, and it's all gluten-free. It's super, super tasty and delicious. And obviously it's a little bit more on the comfort end of the spectrum. My favorite dish at the moment, well, there's two actually. We have a blue corn tacos. Tacos is very on trend. And also you've got this kind of Korean / Mexican fusion thing going on in cooking at the moment, which is very on trend as well. So we have blue corn tacos, which is kind of a fusion of Mexican and Korean. So you've got like Korean sort of spices and flavors, and we have these oyster mushroom, we call them fish. They're not fish obviously, but they're very, very tasty. And tacos, I don't know, you pick them up and eat them. Very messy. Bit of sriracha mayo on the top, very tasty. I like the extreme flavors of tangy, salty, sort of creamy, all at the same time. They're extremely good. And we actually also have another slightly comfort dish, which is very, very popular in my family, which is a pumpkin ravioli dish, which has also got a creamy sauce on it as well. And we make hand-make parmesan out of cashew nuts. It's very, very tasty.
Delicious.
Sounds good.
Delicious. Tell us about your cookbook and where people can find out more about you and your businesses.
So our first book is going to be out very soon, or we've been saying that for a month or so, but it is very imminent. So our first book is, well, it's called Stem and Glory Classic Recipes. So literally all of in fact, the tacos is in there actually. So kind of the real bestsellers since we started to the present day. It's a relatively small book, 60 pages. That's going to be out very soon, but we're already working on our second book, which is going to be focused very much around low carbon cuisine. So not just plant-based, but low carbon plant-based. And we're working with some British grown goods. It's quite an exciting time for British farming at the moment in terms of different crops they're growing over here. And yeah, what else did you ask me?
So if people want to reach out and learn more about
okay.
Stem and Glory or yourself, where would you like them to go?
Well, fortunately, we've got quite a distinctive name. So just type Stem and Glory into Google, we'll come up. So Stem and Glory is like literally everything: website, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. So yeah, just head over to one of those and hopefully coming to a city near you soon.
Let's hope so. Thank you so much, Louise, for joining us today on the Plant Trainers podcast. I'm very hungry, and
I hope when I'm in London, if I'm there this summer, I can pop by and check out the restaurant.
Yeah, please
That'd
do. We'd love to see you.
All right, perfect. All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks for being on the Plant Trainers podcast.
And we will link to everything that you just talked about in our show notes as well at planttrainers.com. And have a beautiful day or night for you.
Thank you very much.